Director of the FBI was the mysterious Deepthroat who helped bring down President Nixon. Mark Felt has revealed that it was he who helped the Washington Post expose the Watergate scandal in the mid-70s. Now he's being hailed as a hero and damned as a traitor.
After 30 years of secrecy, 91-year-old Mark Felt was happy to smile for the cameras, but not answer questions. He'd gradually revealed his secret to his family over the last 3 years, and has now spectacularly come out in this magazine article written by his lawyer. At the time of Watergate, Felt was the #2 person in the FBI and in charge of the Watergate investigation. The White House attempts to frustrate his investigation led him to pass information to Bob Woodward of the Washington Post.
He knows he did the right thing. He knows that he had to breach his code of ethics to save the country. I mean, I think that's not an overly dramatic way of saying it.
His leaks helped the Washington Post expose the full extent of Richard Nixon's involvement in the Watergate break-in and the subsequent cover-up.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Nixon never took any action against Felt, even though he was warned as early as October 1972 that the FBI man was the Post's source. Felt till now has always publicly denied he was Deepthroat, and Bob Woodward always said he would never reveal his identity until he was dead. At first, Woodward refused to comment on the Vanity Fair story, but later the Post confirmed that Felt was the man. His family says he's a hero.
We all sincerely hope the country will see him this way as well.
But much of the country sees it differently, including some of the players in the Watergate drama.
Well, if the ends justify the means, then he's a hero, but my experience is the ends justifying the means is not the way to do it. In my case, it took me to prison.
Former Nixon speechwriter Pat Buchanan went further, labelling Felt a traitor.
I cannot...
Security alert at the Indonesian embassy. Claims of misconduct by Australian soldiers. The Watergate informant finally comes clean. And a farmer's 30 years, the identity of Deepthroat, the source behind the Watergate scandal. Now a former deputy head of the FBI has owned up and revealed that he was the insider behind the downfall of US President Richard Nixon. The journalists who broke the story have confirmed that Mark Felt was their man on the inside.
No, I have to do this my way. You tell me what you know, and I'll confirm.
The mystery has endured for 3 decades. Just who was Deepthroat, the shadowy figure depicted in All the President's Men, leaking information about the Watergate scandal?
Just follow the money.
The most famous source in journalistic history has now stepped from the shadows into the spotlight. The former #2 at the FBI, Mark Felt, says he was Deepthroat.
The family believes my grandfather, Mark Felt Sr., is a great American hero who went well above and beyond the call of duty, at much risk to himself, to save his country from a horrible injustice. We all sincerely hope the country will see him this way as well.
Mark Felt is now 91 and in poor health. His family says he's happy to be honoured for his role.
Mark had expressed reservations in the past about revealing his identity and about whether his actions were appropriate for an FBI man. But as he recently told my mother, I guess people used to think Deepthroat was a criminal, but now they think he's a hero.
Deepthroat urged Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein to follow the money, and they did, all the way to the White House. Their reports helped reveal the government's attempts to cover up a break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters and ultimately brought down Richard Nixon.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Deepthroat's identity has been debated in books, inquiries and academic studies. Mark Felt has long been considered a candidate, but he's repeatedly denied any involvement, once saying that if he had been Deepthroat, he would have done a much better job of bringing down the White House. Mark Simkin.
Tonight, soccer great Pele calls it football's church. Current star Beckham calls it the ultimate stadium. For Australia's multiplex, it's a financial disaster.
There's definitely going to be a look at us, we're in the UK mob.
And blowing away the car park's smoke and shadows.
Some of the agents who worked the case, thought he was Deepthroat at the time.
America's best-known whistleblower finally gets a face. Journalism, but until today we could only guess at who Deepthroat really was. He was the highly placed man somewhere inside the Nixon administration who helped two young Washington Post journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, deliver the coup de grace in the Watergate scandal that brought down the deeply compromised presidency of Richard Nixon.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It took nearly 2 years for the full horror and madness of the White House-sponsored break-in at Democratic Party headquarters in Washington's Watergate Hotel to be revealed. For 30 years, the identity of Deepthroat, Bob Woodward's crucial Watergate source, was Washington's favourite guessing game, until today, when 90-year-old Mark Felt, then Deputy FBI Chief, outed himself. It was the stuff of journalistic legend, of cloak and dagger, of clandestine car park meetings. And now that we know who he was, the definitive Watergate film, All the President's Men, comes even more dramatically to life.
Where are you? Stuck. The story has stalled on us. And you thought I'd help? I'll never quote you.
Another former Washington Post journalist, Ron Kessler, named Mark Felt as Deepthroat in his book on the FBI, The Bureau, 3 years ago. But Felt denied it at the time. I spoke with Ron Kessler at his Maryland home earlier today. Ron Kessler, given that you were the first person to strongly identify Mark Felt as Deepthroat, what were the key indicators for you?
Well, first of all, of course, he was in a perfect position to provide this information to Woodward. He was number 2 in the Bureau at the time. He was in charge of the Watergate investigation. But beyond that, you could speculate about all kinds of people who had some information. But the more important thing to me was that when I went out to interview Mark Felt, and he had not been interviewed in decades, for my book, The Bureau, his daughter told me that, well, lo and behold, Bob Woodward had been out there just about a year and a half ago, and that Woodward had shown up unannounced, came in a limousine, had the limousine park about 2 blocks away, and they went out to lunch and had martinis, which is sort of unusual for Woodward. Now, I just thought there was no reason in the world why Woodward, who has lots to do and was not working on some FBI book, would go out to California and see Mark Felt, and especially would not have all this secrecy surrounding it, where he has the limousine parked 2 blocks away, unless, in fact, he still had a secret relationship with Mark Felt. And that's the basis that I had for concluding that Mark Felt was Deepthroat.
So how would you describe Mark Felt in the Watergate days?
Well, Mark Felt was number 2. He was certainly very ambitious. He was also very offended at the person Nixon had put in charge of the Bureau on top of him, whose name was L. Patrick Gray, who actually became involved in some of the Watergate improprieties. So certainly Mark Felt had a motive here. He certainly would have liked Nixon to leave the White House and perhaps appoint him as FBI director. But I do think beyond that Mark Felt was concerned that the FBI's investigation of Watergate and Nixon would be suppressed by Nixon. Certainly Nixon was trying to do that. He was making up all these stories about CIA secrets that had to be protected, and therefore there shouldn't be an FBI investigation. So the FBI agents working the case, and I interviewed them as well, were worried that there would be some kind of effort to have a cover-up. And by giving this information to Woodward, helping him with his stories, and Woodward already had other sources as well, Mark Felt was pretty much guaranteeing that this investigation would not be suppressed, and I think, really guaranteeing the future of the country, because Nixon was such a criminal that he would have torn up the Constitution, I think, to protect his own position.
So Mark Felt really was in the box seat to know what was going on in the Watergate investigation.
Mark Felt was actually in charge of the Watergate investigation, so every day he would see the 302s, as they were called, the reports of interviews turned in by FBI agents. He was the most up-to-date person on the investigation, had the most complete and accurate information on the investigation. So it's just remarkable that he was the source.
It's equally remarkable, if you think about it, that he wasn't uncovered as Deepthroat at the time, because you can just imagine the kind of witch hunt that would have emanated from the White House, and if he was running the investigation, he would have been a prime suspect.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at all the leaks that have come out over the years, hardly any leaker has ever been caught. And Mark Felt, being an FBI agent, was especially good at making sure he wasn't caught. He had actually spent most of his career in the FBI in counterintelligence, catching spies, and the methods that he gave Woodward to communicate with him, namely moving a New York Times, moving a flower pot, those are classic spy techniques for communicating. KGB uses them, FBI counterintelligence, CIA uses them. So that again, in my mind, pinpointed Mark Felt as the person who was Deepthroat.
How would you describe the ethos of the FBI at the time?
Well, at that point, J. Edgar Hoover had just died. J. Edgar Hoover created the FBI, did a lot of very good things, created the laboratory, created a very good filing system, but at the same time he engaged in all kinds of abuses and illegal conduct, including illegal wiretapping. But this was a time of transition when Hoover had died. They were still afraid he might come back. But at that point, you know, there was good and bad, and I think, you know, Mark Felt was an honorable agent, a very capable agent, and I think in the end he really had the interest of the country at heart.
And how do you think the FBI today will react to the revelations that it was one of their own, in fact one of their most senior people, who blew the whistle on the president?
I don't think they're going to be very surprised. Some of the agents who worked the case, you know, thought he was Deepthroat at the time. I think that the director, Robert Mueller, you know, would understand that perhaps a larger purpose was served by this. So I don't think there's going to be much consternation there at the Bureau.
Do you agree with his daughter, who said to him when she was trying to persuade him to go public that he's a hero?
I think, you know, most people do think of Mark Felt as a hero, based on what I've heard so far, because, you know, the bottom line is this country was a very perilous point in our history at that stage, and it really could have gone either way, and it came out okay, and it's because, in part, of Mark Felt's efforts.
Can you think of a more famous source in journalistic history than Deepthroat?
No, nothing comes close to this source.
Ron Kessler, thanks very much for talking with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that's the program for tonight. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow, but for now, good night.